Headlines is a production of ILTV Studios and cannot be reproduced or represented in part or entirety without express written permission of the Verizon Media Group. Beyond the Headlines is the intellectual property of the Verizon Media Group. Copyright 2021.
Hunger levels in the Bahamas at crisis point. This from the Bahamas Feeding Network. We go in depth on this troubling story for you on this show. This is Beyond the Headlines. I'm Shenique Miller. Welcome to the show. The Bahamas Feeding Network is expressing concern about the recent rise in families who don't have enough to eat or go to bed hungry. The organization calls it a crisis which all Bahamians must pay attention to. Well, we will speak with the director of the Feeding Network, Carey, who has emerged as a leading voice on this issue. Good evening to you, Mario. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines. Thank you for joining us and speaking to this issue that really a number of others in this area who have feeding programs themselves have also echoed the same sentiments that you have echoed. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Shenique, and of course, thank you for allowing me to be on the show today to speak about a very important topic: hunger.
Absolutely,
and hunger hurts.
It does hurt. It does hurt, and imagine people who don't do it intentionally and who want and are desperate for something to eat, or a parent looking at their child who is hungry and they can do nothing about it.
Yeah, and that's why we have organizations like the Feeding Network in an attempt to help to do something about it. And it's a big task and it's a huge undertaking. And hopefully through meetings like this and being able to have an audience, we can bring attention to this sort of different pandemic. Everybody's been focused on COVID, but we have a serious issue going on in this country, and it needs to be addressed, and it's hunger. And it's a very serious topic that needs to be discussed and focused on. And there are a lot of socio and economic things that happen.
Well, we're gonna talk about that.
Find a meal to eat.
Right, we're gonna address that. But crisis is a very strong word. What is the state of hunger in the Bahamas that your organization is noticing that brings this concern to the forefront?
So what we notice, the amount of meals that we have to do every month. Currently, we feed 72,000 meals a month. That's a lot of mouths to feed. If we look at the population of New Providence, that's almost 10% of the population of New Providence that we have to feed every month. We know that we spend an average of about $120,000 a month, which we know is not enough. We notice, based on the feeding centers, that the demand for food and to be fed is increasing. People, with the cost of living, the inflation, job insecurities or lack of jobs thereof, there are a lot of new faces showing up. And those new faces are typically mothers, young children, and the elderly. And they are in desperate need to be fed.
Absolutely. Many organizations have joined you. Just yesterday, in fact, two organizations, two of the more popular ones, or I probably shouldn't say more popular ones, but certainly the more vocal ones who are headed by people more vocal. And they're expressing concern and calling attention to the growing numbers of people that they're seeing. And it's really something that the Bahamas Feeding Network is seeing 72,000 people a month. And that's an increase. And these other organizations too report seeing thousands of people or having to feed thousands of people a week. The thing about it is, what is the reason for this uptick in numbers that you are seeing? You mentioned the fact that, and you're right, this is what was expected and projected to be another side of the pandemic. In fact, its own pandemic, which is hunger. What's driving Bahamians to now put all aside and go wherever it is that they can go for a hot meal?
It's just so many factors that impact that, but a lot of it has to do with the cost of food, access to food, the ability to pay other bills, to be able to stay under a roof. What we're noticing is the parallel impact on homelessness. So the feeding centers, they're noticing that more people are also becoming homeless at the same time. It's just the cost of everything is being impacted. The divide between the have and the have-nots tend to widen. There's a lot of sensitivity to how do you do that. We've always prided ourselves as having a strong middle class, but those things are being challenged for whatever reasons they are.
You find that the middle class you find that the middle class has shrunk?
Economic indicators might find it difficult for persons to get into business. The cost of getting into business, the cost of even real estate and rent and renovating a place and inventory, everything is impacted, and so all of these things play a role. The cost of education has gone up, the cost of uniforms, the gas prices, believe it or not, how much that impacts everything, the cost of fuel, and so these impact the less fortunate at a compounded rate. And it just requires conversations like this. It requires us all to become aware of it. My idea is to bring awareness to this topic, to this crisis, and let's try to find a solution, because it has to happen. There are too many reasons why, crime, we talk about crime. They show direct correlation. Every time hunger increases by 1% in the States, again, with this data, crime goes up by 12%.
Wow.
We want to know why. Why is our crime rising? What impact does going hungry have on that crime? And these are the type of questions that we need to ask ourselves. And then we need to say, okay, well, how can we help? How can we engage with Bahamas Feeding Network? And how can we help feed the less needy? How can we make sure that the child goes to school with food? Those are the questions that I hope that the audience would ask. And those are the type of questions that we're going to find answers to.
And let's talk about the growth in homelessness. I find that to be rather troubling as well. Other organizations are addressing the same thing. What are you noticing? Are these working people who cannot afford rent or mortgage finding themselves out on the streets looking for somewhere to just spend the night?
Yeah, Shenique, what we're seeing is that a lot of the feeding centers are having to negotiate with hotels or places where they can actually have people stay for a week to help them try to get back on their feet, to try to find them a job. And again, just the cost of everything. Cost of electricity is high, cost of development is high. And, that Bahamian dream of home ownership gets wider and wider. It becomes more of a challenge. And again, through policy changes, through strategic thinking, a lot of these matters should be able to be addressed, I would think. We've seen where solutions have been found before, and it just takes the Bahamian people to probably talk about it, make an impression, and then let the policymakers see how they can to make new policies to help alleviate the issues.
Right, exactly. And speaking of the policymakers and what needs to be done, I'll tell you we're going to drop some photographs in here. I don't want to be insensitive, but these are pictures that were posted to social media yesterday by Bishop Lawrence Roll, who himself has a feeding program and feeds thousands of people a week. He even tries to sort of separate it with children one day, parents, but of course, whoever comes. And so this is what he tries to do and what he's doing. And he posted these photographs to his social media yesterday, talking about the same thing you are talking about, which is homelessness, which is of course more and more people showing up that are hungry. Are you seeing even people who cannot turn up themselves? Maybe the request is greater, in terms of people who may be bedridden but need this assistance. How are they being helped?
Well, I've been involved in a number of programs where we would load trucks and vans and cars and crates of food, and we would deliver it to locations like that. Mostly the elderly homes, where we would make sure that they have a hot meal. Um, again, I visited the Greater Commission on Wolf Road last week, and there was some good news and some bad news. When we were there, they were feeding 500 meals, and I said, "Wow, look at the line and look at the people, and whoa, what's happening?" And he goes, "Yeah, man, we do this every day. Every day
Every
we have to
day.
cook 500 meals to feed this community of Wolf Road and the surrounding areas." And then they're saying every day there are new faces showing up, and that has to give a message, right? So why are new people coming, and the need for food? But what was interesting, Shenique, I must tell you, and this is how we can help. While I was there, there was a group of persons from a restaurant that worked in Bahamas, and I asked them questions. What are you guys doing here? So what this group did was they went amongst the staff. They all raised money. They all went out and bought food. They started cooking food. They did 250 meals. They cooked at 4 o'clock in the morning at Saturday morning, and then they all got together and they came and served the meals. So that was a self-initiative by a group of caring Bahamians that made a difference on their own.
Yes.
There was no help from their employers. There was no help from anybody else, but they took it upon themselves to come out and feed 250 people for that day.
Which
These
added,
are the solutions.
which obviously
this is
added.
what it's going to take.
Exactly. It's going to take all of us doing stuff like that because it added to what was already being done. So that's 250 people who also got a hot meal. Bahamians, people helping people. Really good to hear that. Let's talk about jobs. You hear that the economy is moving in the right direction. The wheels are beginning to turn. Things are beginning to look promising. What is happening, though, that it appears as though a segment of the population is falling through the cracks and not having access to opportunities?
It's always a tough one. I kind of look at it in a broad sense about being qualified, about having a diversified economy, which I think we suffer from. We're so segmented in tourism and maybe financial services. We're limited on our scope of what we can do. I know those topics are being addressed at a higher level, where we're trying to figure out what can the Bahamas export other than fish. What creative content can we do? I know there's a lot of educational platforms that sort of addressing that. And again, if you are saying, well, we can better ourselves through education in a micro level, if that child goes to school hungry every day, he's not learning. It can't happen. They cannot learn and be educated and be expected to be behave if they're hungry. It will not happen.
You're right. You're right, and that's an issue we know. Education is an issue in this country. Whether it needs to be reformed or not, that's a different matter, not for this conversation. But certainly, if a child goes to school hungry and their stomach is growling in the classroom, they certainly are not paying attention to what the teacher is saying.
There's no magic to that. There's just without exception. If that child is hungry, and when we're young and we're running around and we're burning energy, we want food and we want to eat and we want our lunch and we want our snacks. But imagine not having any of that. And it just has those impacts. So, and again, Shenique, I'm confident that we can beat this. I think if we can continue these type of dialogues, if we can get more organizations involved, I think there's solutions. I feel very confident in that, right?
Well, we absolutely need it. I want to ask you, is this just happening, this level of new homelessness, this level of new people seeking assistance in terms of just a hot meal or underemployment? Is it just happening here in New Providence? I know it's happening in Grand Bahama, or is it happening countrywide?
COVID might have brought a lot of things to the forefront. Especially for me. I mean, I've been working with the Bahamas Feeding Network now for over 4 years. I would go to Fox Hill and cook food and pack up and distribute. And then during COVID, I initiated a program called Pasta Fridays, where I teamed up with Grey Cliff, and we were doing 8,000 meals a day. So we were feeding 8,000 people every Friday. We called it Pasta Fridays. The car lines they would wrap around where people were hoping to get a meal.
Wow.
So I kind of got a taste of it. I would see the children, I would see the mothers, I would see we would take the food to the elderly. So it's been going on for a while, I think, and I think it now needs to come to the forefront, and that's what it's all about. I think we need to get the message out there that we are in a crisis.
Yeah, and it's urgent because, as you said, a hungry person becomes a desperate person, and so the social ills will follow, unfortunately. When you speak about finding answers and all of us needing to do something, let's just examine where some of the answers lie. You mentioned diversifying the economy. What role does agriculture, which eventually leads to food security, what role does agriculture play in that?
I think I'm glad that we have programs, incubator programs, that are now addressing those. I don't know the names of them at the acronyms, but there are programs where money has been put into agriculture. I know there are programs where they're taking containers, Shenique, the shipping containers, and they're converting those into agricultural growing area spaces.
Oh,
That's
promising.
Is equivalent. Sorry?
That's very promising.
Yeah, it is. It is. And each container is equivalent to 5 acres of cultivated land. Think about that, right? But I know it's going to take a while. But, the idea of self-sustaining through agriculture has been talked about for so many years since I was a kid. But now I think, it seems to be elevating in its importance that we need to be able to feed ourselves.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And that is promising, and it can get people employed. And like you mentioned, diversifying the economy, that's also diversifying jobs and letting people know that, guess what? A job in agriculture, a job in fisheries, those things are also jobs that oftentimes they're quite lucrative for those who are involved, but certainly it's a paycheck at the end of the week. We need to just begin pushing people, I think, steering them, maybe from the high school level, in areas that are maybe not traditional, but certainly in areas that can be just as promising for a family, for someone to make a living and to go and build a life.
Yeah, what's unique, I visited one of the facilities, and the person that had the jobs, these were young Bahamians, and they're in white jackets, and they're dressed, they're in an environment where they have to be dressed according. This is not farming out in the hot sun, pulling weeds and stuff like that. This is very high tech, very effective, very efficient way of growing. And I know there are some programs that some people have sponsored, and that matter of farming is sort of starting to get growth in the Bahamas, which I think is in the right direction. The other thing that the hunger and the food, Shenique, unfortunately, what can be afforded when we're feeding the needy might not be the healthiest food. Right?
You know what, Mario, you've gone into a very important and urgent area as well. Yeah, continue.
Mm-hmm. So what happens is it's what you can afford, and the priority is to have people fed. But what impact does that have now on our medical services and our mental health services? If you're eating white bread, white sugar, all the impact of diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, all of these things that we seem to have unusually high rates of as a country is impacted by the diet, right? So not only do we have to feed, but how do we try to feed a healthier diet?
Absolutely. And that is why I leaned toward agriculture and opportunities that's available there, whether it's jobs, whether it's how we're growing food. I'm happy to hear you talk about the containers that are being used to farm, and the new ways of farming that are now emerging in the Bahamas. Because while you try to feed hungry people who in this crisis that are turning up, you certainly want to give them a forkful of health every time they show up, eh?
Shenique, I agree. And so my idea, and I know I have some friends who do farming. They do it for fun, but they do it well. And I'm trying to figure out, how can we get this stuff that's being farmed to the kitchens of those that are needing. I'm also an avid fisherman, and I'm trying to figure out how can I get fishermen to be involved where they can give us fish so that now we can feed the people instead of necessarily fried food or canned food, right? Mm-hmm. So it takes takes an effort. So, and this is the direction I'm trying to move. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of support and team help in this direction as well.
Well,
so we want to try to feed more persons. We need to try to feed them a better diet, right? And all that takes funding, and that's what it's all about. We need money, right?
It really does. I mean, Bahamas Feeding Network spending in excess of $120,000 a month to feed around 70,000 people a month. There are other organizations that on a weekly basis see thousands of people and perhaps spend thousands of dollars doing it for that week. But you're right. What's also important? Getting them fed, getting them full, but also healthy. Because I remember Mario looking at healthcare, public healthcare in the Bahamas, in excess of $800 million a year. The Ministry of Health spends, and perhaps it's even more now, on just I guess medicating people for non-communicable
diabetes and
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And so the thing is, while we have these wonderful centers, and I think it's more than 100 of them that have feeding programs, we also want to make sure that we have good, healthy, quality food that's going out there, because then you don't want to have to pay on another end, And so Mario, Mario Carey, I thank you.
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I do thank you very much. If I want to give you an opportunity for a final comment.
Again, thank you for allowing me to speak on this very important topic. And the Bahamas Feeding Network is a very established 2013. We have a very strong board of directors, and we are trying to make a difference. And I would say thank you to all of those that volunteer in this country to help to feed those in need.
Thank you very much once again. Talking about the hunger crisis in the Bahamas, that is the director of the Bahamas Feeding Network, Mario Carey, addressing this very urgent issue here in the country that is really now just appearing. And a number of other organizations have also joined in with him just this week. In fact, just yesterday, also talking about the hunger crisis that's developing, that they're seeing just based on numbers, new faces showing up at various centers for a hot meal. I thank you very much once again, Mario, for sharing that with us and for talking about it and also giving some ideas on how it can be addressed. But the fact is, it needs addressing. Thank you so much again for joining us here on Beyond the Headlines.
You're welcome. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much. You as well. Thank you. We're going to take a break and come back with more right after this here on Beyond the Headlines.
What does it mean to be Bahamian? It's so much more than